Welcome to University Educational Services Radon Continuing Education Program. In this issue, we're going to discuss the question of the potential for tampering in radon measurements. And with us to help with this discussion are three individuals. To my immediate left, Richard Ross from Ross Systems in Blairstown, New Jersey. To my immediate right, Dori Natali from the King of Prussia area, who is a home radon tester as well, and Tony Capolini to her right from Dingman's Ferry, also a home inspector. And all three of them, I think, have a modest experience in tampering, not that they do tampering, but in suspecting perhaps some tampering, and a significant experience in home testing as well. So let me start off with the first question to Richard. Richard, do you have any experience in seeing tampering or suspecting tampering on the radon issue?
Yes, we definitely do. Almost 100% of our testing is real estate related, and in those situations the people are almost always in the house at the time that we're doing the testing. And I'd say in about 15% of the cases we find some evidence of tampering.
Well, let me just stop you there, Richard, for a second. Now you bring up a good number there. 15% you have some evidence of tampering, and if I could pose that same question to you, Tony and Dori, do you see about that same percentage, or higher or lower?
Very accurate. I run into quite a bit. Mine would average between 10 and 15%. I see signs, but the steps that I've taken recently have put a lid on it, and it's much better now.
You think it's going down?
Yes, the methods that I'm using.
All right, we're going to look at those methods in a minute. Dori, how about you? What percentage do you think you've seen?
Well, I think probably between 10 and 15%. I'm not as suspicious probably as I should be, and I do rely on my non-interference agreement a lot, just for liability.
Right.
Not necessarily that's going to stop the tampering, but for protection.
Let's hear a little more on this non-interference agreement. This is a form where the client signs the form.
That's correct.
And says that they agree not to fool around with the detector.
Right.
In some regard.
Right. It tells them exactly how not to bring fresh air into the house of any sort, and just lists everything right down the line, so there's no doubt in their mind what they can or cannot do. And when they sign that non-interference agreement, I feel that it puts them a little bit on the line to say, hey, I better listen to what she's saying.
Right. It holds them...
Makes them responsible.
Yeah, obviously a little more responsible to the whole issue. That's right. Now, Tony, you have a non-interference agreement, right?
Yes, and I get a feel for the people as I talk to them. Fortunately, most of the homes I inspect are vacant, but when the sellers are there, you speak with them, and over the years you get a feel if they know about radon. And sometimes they jokingly say, well, I'm going to put it out in the porch and give it a breath of fresh air. And then I show them the non-interference agreement and have them sign it. And I say, and I show them my tampering devices, and I say, if I suspect any tampering, and I show them, this is what I mailed to the customer, that the test has been tampered with, yes or no, and the result is accurate, yes or no. And I said, if it's no, I said, you could blow your real estate deal, plus you're going to be liable for the retest. If the client wants it retested, you're the guy that's going to have to pay for it. So that usually puts a little fear in their hearts.
Okay.
And between that and the sealing of windows and doors, I think it straightens them out when they see how we seal a house.
Again, we're going to get onto that in a minute, Tony. Richard, now you have a non-interference agreement as well?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and you have, well, let me ask you, when I mentioned to Dori, I was saying that you have the client sign it. What if the client's not the homeowner? What if somebody's in the home, suppose it's my house, but I'm out of town for a few days, and the realtor comes down with you to put the detector in place. Who signs the non-interference agreement in that case?
Well, very often we can't get a signature in that case. If it's somebody who's living in the house who's not the owner, usually we ask them to sign the form. Just because if they're going to be there at the time that the test is being conducted, they can acknowledge that they understand the conditions.
Right.
And usually they sign it. If it's a realtor, we generally don't get a signature in that case because they're coming in only when we're there, and then they're leaving, the next minute. So, and they don't want to make a commitment as to what's going to happen during the test.
Yeah. Also, now, Dori, what do you do if the house is vacant?
Well, I like vacant houses because you don't have to worry about anybody telling you what they think you should do. You can just go about your business and set up and leave when you're ready.
Right. Has have any of you ever gone past the house in which you put a detector in and drove by a few days later while you're waiting for the time to pass and seen windows open perhaps that hadn't been opened when you were there before? Tony, I think you had mentioned one of those to me some time ago.
The day that you and I took the certification test in Trenton, I had a test being done in Bushkill, and on my non-interference agreement, I have the date I'm going to pick it up. Well, that's all a bunch of baloney. I never pick it up that date. I either pick it up early or late. And I stopped by this house just to check because it was on the way. And there was tenants in there, and sure enough, the doors that I have posted with my sign here that tells you to keep the doors closed and the windows, I put these in all the windows and the doors. And when I arrived, it was a nice balmy day. It was last April, right?
Yeah.
I think. And when I arrived, the doors were wide open. So I avoided that test.
Letting some fresh air in. Yeah, the truth of the matter is, if you open the windows, you can have a very serious impact on the value that the detector is going to get, and that is regardless of the detector type. There is no detector that, in fact, is completely foolproof. However, sometimes if you're using something like a continuous working level monitor that prints out every hour perhaps, you can tell if there seem to be some unreasonable decreases in radon concentrations that should not be occurring, or at least you can have suspicions about that. Well, let's talk about the equipment. Richard, I see you brought a Femtotech monitor.
Yes.
And is that a continuous radon gas monitor?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's a continuous radon gas monitor. This is one of the latest pieces of equipment that's manufactured. And actually it gives a printout not only of the, I have a tape here too, not only of the radon level each hour, hour by hour, but it gives the temperature and the humidity as well as the barometric pressure hour by hour. So if, in fact, the windows were open during the test, you could actually see it, and you could see what time the windows were open. So it gives a lot of control on the conditions.
Right. Well, what you see is, for example, if the window is open and it's a cold winter's day, you should notice the temperature go down.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And you'll notice the radon levels go down too.
And the radon level. Now, what do you do in the springtime? Here today, for example, it's pretty nice out. I had my front door open most of the day, and the temperature inside and outside is really the same. So if I leave the door open, you're not going to notice the temperature difference, I don't think.
No, you won't. You won't notice the temperature difference, but what you will notice is the fluctuation of radon levels.
You'll see that go down.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially if the house has been closed for 12 hours prior to the arrival.
Right. Although that could be due to the natural behavior of radon as well.
Sure.
I think what I'm leading to is that this is a good idea, and it gives you more data to look at rather than a one sample measurement. But it doesn't guarantee that what you see is tampering or not tampering.
It doesn't guarantee that. It gives you a very good idea. Though.
Right. Right.
It gives you a very good indication.
That's a darn good point. Now,
Richard, do you use that in vacant homes? Do you feel
Yes.
safe leaving it there?
Yes. Yeah.
how much is that device?
$3,000.
$3,000.
Do you also use that more than a 24-hour period?
48.
You do use a 48
hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me point out, too, the EPA protocols currently permit no testing except for grab sampling below 48 hours. Everything is 48 hours or more, unless you're going in for grab sampling. Okay. So if you put a monitor like that, and you do have to leave it in for 48 hours. Right.
Wasn't there a time when they could do the 24-hour
There,
continuous radon?
I'm trying to recall back. There was a time, I believe, when you could do shorter-term measurements. But I think most everybody in the industry will agree that the longer period you make the measurement, the closer you get to the year-long average. And the action limit of 4 picocuries per liter is based on a yearly average. What we typically get are all short-term measurements.
Right.
The only long-term measurements that I have seen are those taken with alpha tracks. To leave an instrument like that in the house for a year would be great, but economically not reasonable,
Yes.
I wouldn't think.
Yeah.
Right. Now, Tony, you have some tamper-resistant materials there.
Yes.
And how about telling us about those?
Okay. I neglected to bring the old-fashioned device. It was called a grid sheet. We used to set the canister on a sheet that had many different lines with numbers and letters, and I would record on another sheet where the edge of the canister touched. Then when I picked it up, I would hold it in place and draw a line around it, and then I could check those readings against mine to see if it was moved. And I used to use double-faced sticky tape underneath it so they couldn't lift it, and double-faced tape this down, plus tape over the top, so that if they threw a towel over it, it would stick and pull the tape off. And most people don't have double-face tape around the house. They only have single-face. But that is like the horse and buggy is old-fashioned. The newest thing that I've been using are these mesh bags, these paper seals, and these plastic seals, which once you snap them shut, it's like on your electric meter. You cannot remove it unless you cut it. You put it in the hole, and a good place to put this on a stairway banister. And you snap it in there, and they cannot take the canister out of the house or move it. And the fact that there's several straps going to different directions on the banister, it'd be very hard for them to encase it in a plastic bag, because these are brittle, and these would tear. And there's a place you write the serial number of the plastic seal on here, just in case they would have seals, which I doubt.
This is getting pretty ornate here.
But they are. I get up very tight about tampering. I don't want to be sued. In being an inspector, everybody's
Sure.
happy. Most of my clients are from Manhattan, and they all like to make lawyers rich, it seems. So
Now, where did you get the little plastic tag? I think for people who are watching this might be interested in
I think
other
it's
home
on here.
testers,
There's
where
a
they get
firm
these
in
tags.
Bethlehem. It's called Equitron Incorporated. They're very inexpensive. These you can reuse. The mesh bags you can reuse. The only thing you really have to buy are the plastic seals.
Right.
But this is the real beauty that I like the most. These are little seals that I seal the windows and doors with. On my non-tampering agreement, I give them one door to enter the house. And all the other doors, you put these little paper seals over the windows and the doors, and you cannot remove them once they're on.
Right where the door, where the crack is between the
Right.
window frame and the window itself.
After these are on 5 minutes, you cannot take it off without tearing it. In fact, they're so fragile, when I take them off of here sometimes, they tear. And,
And you haven't seen them damage the paint or the...
well, that's the only bad thing. They're hard to get off.
Oh, that's a very...
They stick. You're supposed to use fingernail polish remover. But I show that if the client's in the house, I show them this, and I say, you know, if these seals are broken, this test is void. And since I've been using these, I haven't had any problems. This really, they cannot defeat this thing. There's no way they can open the window or the door. Plus, I put this sheet here that says there's a radon test in operation, and the rules and regulations about setting the temperature. I also put one of these on the thermostat. A lot of our testing is done in the wintertime, so they can't turn the heat down, because the house should be tested as it's lived in. With the heat, it's 68 or 70. So I put one of these over the thermostat and say, you can't, this is it, you know, until I come back.
Right.
But
Now, how much time does all of this add to your test in a given house?
Not really too much. My partner helps me out on the inspections, and while I'm typing the report into the computer, I take a laptop along. This is her job. She seals the windows and the doors and records the numbers and all that. So actually, in the time they were in the house, it does not. But if I was doing it myself, I would say 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how many windows and how big the house is.
Right.
But it makes it very hard for them to defeat this. They can't take it out in the back porch and give it a breath of air.
Yeah, right. Dory, you look like you're going to jump in on this.
Well, I really do. I don't know how you talk your people into accepting all these different things, because I have enough trouble getting them to sign the non-interference agreement. And in the spring, summer, and fall, when you mention keeping the house closed for 48 hours and 12 hours prior to, everybody's off the wall. And now you introduce all these other things. I have my own little methods for tamper-proof, which work to a degree. These are great, but I would think that the tape, I'd get a lot of bad feedback on that, and only giving them one door to go in and out of. I think that's a good idea.
Well,
But do they object?
They complain, but you know, with the real estate market being down like it is, I say, you know, if you want to sell your house, you have to cooperate for 2 days. For 2 days, it's not going to be that bad. And
Dory,
I haven't
what,
had any real problems with anybody being uptight about it.
Well, good. Dory, what kinds of things are you doing? Besides, do you do more than the non-interference agreement?
Yes, I do my own little method of how I set the canisters, similar to the graph paper, so that when I come back, I can have a pretty good idea if anyone has touched it. I will not know if anybody has thrown anything over it, though.
Right.
But
right.
if it's been moved, I can tell.
Right. Now, Richard, you use a continuous monitor, which is a fairly expensive feature. I would hope you would never lose that in a house.
Yeah.
But have Tony or Dory, perhaps, have either of you gone to a house and not been able to find the detector that you'd put in? Is that right? Both of you had?
About 3 weeks ago, I did a new home. It was on the market for 4 years. It was a big spec house, and he sold it. And I had a canister in new houses that are vacant. I hide the canisters where and I put my dummy out where it's obvious for them to see. And the one that I had hidden when I arrived was on the kitchen countertop with the tape over the hole.
No kidding. Now, let me point out, I don't think this is clear yet, that the one in the green bag that you have there, Tony, that's your dummy canister. You put that out, and you don't care if that gets any radon or not.
Right.
That's just to tell the homeowner that there's the kit. And then you go and you hide a second one.
I hide 2 others.
Oh, and you hide 2
From
others.
2 different labs.
I see. That's right. You have been
use 2
using 2
labs all
different
the time.
labs. That's right. That's right. And in fact, I can say something good about Tony right here, because I think it was about a year ago, it was brought to my attention that you had a set of results from one lab and a set of results from the other lab, and they were consistently different. One was always lower than the other. We had looked into that. But that was an interesting check even on the labs themselves, to look back at that. But so that's kind of a clever thing, to have one that's on display, so to speak, and the real ones tucked away. But you've actually even had the ones hidden tampered with.
Yeah, I think a carpenter found it. A lot of this tampering is not intentional. Some of it's
I was
accidental.
about to mention that. I think some of it is accidental.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. If people have a pet, a dog or something
I think
like that.
opening their windows and opening their doors could be intentional, but the few that I have found actually missing, somebody knocked it over and didn't even know it was there.
Uh-huh. Right.
There was only one instance, and it was in a commercial building, where I think, again, a carpenter or some tradesman who really wasn't aware of what it was probably moved it. I didn't think that anyone who was involved in management would have done that, because they're trying to get a mortgage.
Yeah, right,
You know?
right.
You know Dean Ritter from ABE testing in Allentown area? He taught at Harrisburg at the continuing education seminar of ours.
Uh-huh.
And he had an interesting story. He called it the ant house. He went back to the house a day early to pick up the canisters, and every window and door in the place was open. And the homeowner was out there cutting the grass, and he said when he saw him, his jaw dropped. And his story was that he just had the house sprayed for termites, and the fumes were very strong, and he had to air it out. And Dean said you couldn't smell anything but fresh cut grass.
Oh, jeez. Now, Dory, you're using a charcoal canister.
Yes.
There's an array of instruments and detector types that you can use from the, I would say, somewhat sophisticated Femtotech instrument. I see Tony's brought the Honeywell monitor. And the charcoal can, which I will say has been the backbone, so to speak, of the radon industry so far. Why did you choose charcoal canisters over perhaps some of these other instruments or whatever else might be out there?
I've used only charcoal canisters outside of the Alpha Trax for long term, and I've used 3 different types. This, of course, is the standard type that you just seal and open it and exposes the charcoal. I've used the diffused barrier type at one point, and the first canisters I used were more of a salt shaker type canister, which had a lid that screws on and
It's
off.
a little plastic vial?
Yeah, they were all, but they were all charcoal, every one
Yeah.
of them. I just think that it's probably the easiest one to use. The diffused canister, I prefer the lid, I believe, opening and closing the lid rather than just the diffused barrier. That's just a personal preference.
Right. I think one distinction you can make is that if you have an open face can, the time during which you can leave it exposed is shorter than the time over which you can leave a canister with a diffusion barrier. I think you probably use these for 2 days?
Yes.
Something like that. And in fact, if you go to 4, 5, or 6 days, then the test results can become a little bit skewed.
Right, I don't usually let it in more than 3 days,
Right.
but
And-
usually 2.
Right, okay. And now if you use a diffusion barrier, then those you can leave in for approximately 7 days, and sometimes as long as 10 days, and still get reasonable results from. And that's the primary function of the diffusion barrier. It extends the sampling time of the canister. Tony, I see you did bring the Honeywell Addies monitor, and how do you like that monitor?
Well, it's great, but being in real estate inspections, I sometimes have 4 or 5 canisters out at the same time, so I couldn't afford to have 4 or 5 of these machines around. They were over $1,000.
Right.
I don't have the printer with this, but I just use this as a backup to check on my canisters. And that's why I asked Rich if he leaves them in an empty house. I would be scared to death to leave this in a vacant house.
Yeah.
He has a handle on it. He's probably got a big chain and a padlock. He chains it down.
Good idea.
But I keep this in my basement, and as we were talking before the show, I'm amazed at the way this thing bounces around when the fronts go through. How it jumps up 6 or 7 points
Yeah.
overnight, and then
Yeah.
goes down just as quick when the weather clears up. It's amazing.
Richard, how many of these do you have in your company?
We have about 12 of them now in our
12?
New Jersey
Wow.
office. Yeah.
So then,
well, we're doing primarily relocation company testing, and for those situations, they actually require a continuous monitor. So we were using continuous monitors before we started doing relocation work, but now it's a requirement of those companies.
Right.
So we have to.
Now, on the continuous radon monitor, do you have to take that down for calibration periodically down
Yes.
to Atlanta or Las Vegas?
Yes.
Whichever you
Every-
prefer, huh?
Every 6 months.
Every
Yes.
6 months. So that's actually an additional expense.
Oh, sure.
What do they
to-
charge, Richard, on the calibration?
$75, $100, depends on
Honeywell charges
depends on the lab.
95.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
now you take that down to the EPA chamber in Atlanta?
Well, there are two kinds of calibration. We take part in the RMP program,
Right.
which is a federal program, and we have to go down every year or so for that. We either go to Montgomery, Alabama, or Las Vegas.
Right, now there's no, as far as I know, there's no fee for that.
Not yet,
Just,
no.
not yet,
Not
right, well
yet,
said,
yeah.
yeah, let's
Yeah.
keep our fingers crossed on
Yeah.
that.
Not yet.
You had just the travel expense back and
Yes.
forth. Well, hopefully you can make that into a pleasant travel expense.
If it's Las Vegas. yeah.
If it's Las Vegas,
Montgomery is.
a little less to do there, huh?
Yes.
And is that also true with the Honeywell monitor?
I don't use this for official results. This is for my
Okay.
information, but I do send it to Honeywell once a year. And the last time I sent it in, they made it 2.5 times more sensitive plus calibrated it. It was a $95 fee.
Oh, is that right? So they changed the electronics
They
in it
changed
somewhat.
electronics, right.
Right,
But I find it very, very close with the charcoal canisters when I put them
Okay.
side by side.
right. So I want to switch over to Richard again for a second. Do you use charcoal canisters at all? Or,
We do, but usually just as a backup for this type of test, or if it's for a residential test that's not a real estate,
Okay.
it's not a
right.
real estate transaction,
Right.
where there's no interest in tampering with it.
Right, right.
No.
So at least to some degree, all of us interact with a laboratory somewhere along the line at some point. And I guess I'll pose this to anybody who jumps on it. What do you like best about a lab? There's the question. What do you like best about a lab?
Quick service.
Quick service,
it.
quick turnaround,
Yes.
huh?
Yes.
One-
Quick
That's it.
turnaround?
Yeah.
One lab gives me a phone
it.
call the day they do the test and gives me the results.
Oh, is that right? Is
Which,
that right? Right over the phone?
My lab does that too.
And then they,
Yes.
what, follow up with a written report
Right.
later?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
that's
One grumble I have with this lab, they're a great lab and they're very accurate, but on their printouts that you get back, it has comments, and they have a B or a 1 or a 2, and B means basement.
Mhm.
So I write in basement after the B, but if I forget and I mail this report to Manhattan, the guy gets it and he calls me back, and I'm not in, he gets my answering service, and I call him back on my nickel, and he wants to know what the B is.
Uh-huh, right.
So I asked the lab, I says, why can't you just have your computer print basement or first floor?
Yeah.
Because they have some kind of agreement with DER that they can't understand this, they have to do it the DER regulations.
Yeah,
It's
the
just-
codes that
Yes.
DER has for housing reporting is...
I don't know, basement is a basement to everybody, even DER.
Yeah. What's the, Richard, let me ask you this one. What's the worst experience you've had with a lab? Or have you had any bad experiences with a
Well,
lab?
the worst experience I had was lost canister, but we never really knew whether that was the lab or
Yeah.
was the delivery service.
Could have been lost in the mail or
Yes.
however you sent
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
But our lab is pretty good. We're using Pennsylvania Lab, Microbac
Uh-huh,
labs,
okay.
and they're
All right.
excellent.
Good, good, very good.
I just had the lab call me the last week. I had put 2 canisters in one bag, the small ones. They fit in there real nice. It saves on postage. And when the lab called me, he said, we got 2 sheets in there, only 1 canister. And I distinctly remember putting the 2 in because it's hard to staple them when you have 2 in there. Somehow 1 canister got legs. I don't know where it ended up.
Yeah. It's real helpful to get the phone call.
Oh, very. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially if there's a high reading.
Oh,
you
yeah.
get
Because
a
otherwise
large
you wait for the reports another maybe 2 to 3 days to get the mail
Right.
results.
Yes.
So the phone call is important.
I have a good one about lab.
Let's hear it.
Last year when I was phasing out of the one lab, only because he was no longer going to be in the business, I had several canisters left, and I said, well, what am I going to do? He said, not to worry. He said, your new lab can process just the same as I do. I said, okay, fine. But he did not give me the weigh-in figures. And so I went and set the canisters, took them to the new lab, and he said, well, this is great. He said, but I can't do anything with it. And
Without
I
the
couldn't
actual-
find the other lab. They had disappeared at that point. So,
Well, there has been some consolidation that's occurred in the last
Yeah.
year or two.
so I lost
actually.
about 4 or 5 canisters.
So you have to go back and retest those, or?
I had to go back and retest, talk about a problem. I was also out of town, so.
Wow. Yeah.
Paul, do you know why
That is a
Alpha
horror
Track
story.
labs take so long to get results? They like a 2 to 3 week in there.
I have no idea. My understanding is that
Yes.
alpha tracks are read optically by instruments. The little plastic strip with is first passed through a solution, an acid solution. Much as you develop film, photographic film, the scratches become almost visible. And in fact, if you were to look through a microscope, you can see the scratches, or the pits, if you like. They're passed through an optical reader, and if my understanding is correct, some light is shined down through the plastic strip, and then when it gets to a pit, it gets a good reflected pulse, and it reads that as one scratch mark. I would think that all of that would be highly automated,
You would
and
think.
that would go pretty fast. I don't know why the alpha track should take a significant amount of time. I mean, how many alpha tracks, what percentage of all your testing is alpha tracks?
Well, after the original screening test is high, then we go back in these real estate transactions, they put money in escrow, go ahead and close on the house, and then we get sent back to do an alpha track.
Right, right.
In Pike County, the tests that I've been doing are roughly 30% of them are not passing.
30%.
30%
All right, that's
in Pike
interesting.
County.
That's interesting. Richard? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Tony.
I had gotten a thing from DER county by county, and it's old, that's several years old, and I compared it to that, and they were right on the money. It is very
Yeah.
close to 30%.
In Monroe County, we did a study here at East Stroudsburg University, and we found that 50% of the homes that we tested were above, and we tested 2,500 homes. It was a significant number.
50%.
50% of the homes were above 4. Richard, have you found anything similar to
Well,
that?
in New Jersey, it's about 20% statewide that we
Statewide,
found.
uh-huh.
That we found,
Yeah,
and
pretty
in
vast.
Pennsylvania, 25%,
Mhm.
something like that.
Yes, I
Yeah.
think the 25 to 30% range where I am.
Right, right.
I have a story on Alpha Tracks. I did a screening on a house and it was high, and they went ahead and closed, and the new homeowner's living in there. I put an Alpha Track in the basement, and the day I went to pick it up, he came to the door and he handed it to me. And I thought, well, his house, there's no reason he should cheat on it.
Uh-huh,
But what
yeah.
he didn't tell me is he dropped it on the floor,
Oh.
and the seal flew apart, just a little plastic thing,
Yeah.
and that little piece of film in there got legs, it disappeared. I got a letter from the lab saying that you couldn't read it, and I went back and I asked the guy, what happened? He said, well, I dropped it on the floor. I was down the cellar looking around for this thing, we never did find it.
There's a very small percentage of homeowners who are testing their homes for radon. Almost all the radon testing that occurs are in real estate transactions. Richard, I think you said maybe almost 100%. I hear values 90%, 99%. Predominantly homeowners are not testing their homes for radon. There will be homeowners who are not in the midst of a real estate transaction watching this video at some point, and I would like to ask, what kinds of things can we tell the homeowner, frankly, that would help motivate them to have their homes tested for radon?
Well, the obvious answer is the health issue, and to protect themselves and their family. And then a secondary reason is that one day they will probably be selling the house, and if there is a radon problem, they'll be responsible for fixing it. They might as well test now, and if there's a problem, fix it now, and have the health benefit of being
the
in
process.
a safe house.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But don't you think that all ties in with educating the public?
Yes.
Sure, sure it does.
My biggest
Yes.
ally is attorneys.
Yes.
I have them all pretty much brainwashed, and when a client comes in and wants their home inspected, they almost insist that they do the radon. But going directly to the homeowner is, I bulk mailed a housing development, 88 homes that has a radon problem this winter, and I did not get one reply or one phone call or one question out of 88 homes.